Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Matt Green, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Thanks for having me here.
You and I first talked, I guess, about a year and a half ago.
I think that's right. It's been a while.
And I can't remember who connected us.
Me neither.
Somebody gave me your phone number and said, Matt would love to talk to you.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay.
I remember getting a text from you, but I don't remember how it happened.
I'll think of it eventually. It was a sister. She has a sister. They live next door to each other. Your parents probably know them. All right, so you and I both grew up in Ashland.
Uh-huh.
And Ashland, since your birth, has been known as the center of the universe.
That's right.
Do you have any idea why Ashland considers itself the center of the universe?
I don't. I mean, I do remember growing up and being in the variety show and singing the Ashland, Center of the Universe song, which I could probably still remember word for word if I wasn't too embarrassed to sing it in a recorded podcast. But I guess I don't really know where the name came from.
So I grew up next door to the mayor back in the 70s. I was born in the late 60s. And
Dick Gillis.
Yeah, exactly.
He came up with it?
Yes.
That does ring a bell now that you say that.
Are you old enough to remember Dick Gillis?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
The cowboy hat, right?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
He'd be in the variety show.
Of course.
Yeah, I definitely
anything
remember.
in front of people where people would listen to him and watch him.
Yeah,
he was all about that.
Yeah,
he came up with it, and it obviously stuck.
Okay, that is sounding familiar now that you say it.
I had a buddy come in here. He's from Jersey, and he said, "Yeah, I'm from Jersey, center of the universe." I'm like, "Hold on, I don't think you really understand where you are right now."
You know, there's, well, I don't want to jump the gun on anything, but I was walking in, I think it was in Ohio, and there's a town called Center of the World.
Wow, that's nowhere near the universe,
I know.
Though.
It's pathetic.
They're not even really trying.
Pathetic.
You were walking through Ohio on your way to Oregon.
Yeah.
We'll talk about
that.
Yeah.
I just realized I was saying it. I don't want to get ahead of things.
Yeah, I looked at your route, by the way. We'll come back to this. But
okay.
I looked at your route, and I'm like, just walking across Montana makes me very tired.
That was the longest.
Just thinking about it.
That was the longest single state for sure. That was a long, long one.
I mean, you look at the map and you start to realize the scale. You're like, I don't understand.
I know. And a lot of it, you might think of it as just being like beautiful Rocky Mountains, but a lot of it's just wide open, really hot in the summer, just kind of flat, the eastern part of the state. It's a long, long journey.
We're going to come back to that trip. Do I call it a trip?
Yeah, sure.
Or
you can
journey?
call it whatever you want.
Yeah, I'll call it a journey. All right, so as a kid in Ashland, what were you into? Like when you were 9, 10, 11?
Yeah, I guess, I was into kind of sports, soccer, baseball. I was just getting into baseball card collecting, a lot of Legos, playing in the woods. Where my parents live, it's just outside of Ashland. There's a big wooded area behind the house. You could just kind of go frolic back there.
Just disappear.
Yeah. So that was definitely a big part of growing up. But yeah, a few kids in the neighborhood to play around with, play wiffle ball.
Wiffle ball's a great sport.
Yeah, it is.
Completely underrated.
It is.
They actually have huge leagues now. YouTube's made it blow
It's
up
one of those
bit.
like nostalgia things, like dodgeball, where you become an adult and then you look back so fondly on that game of your childhood, and everyone who's your age also looks back on it fondly. So yeah, there's the big kickball leagues and all those kind of games.
It's amazing how creative wiffle ball fields can get.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I played in a side yard.
Uh-huh.
I
see. What you mean.
There was like a bird fountain in the middle of the outfield. Just silly. In fact, one of my favorite fields, there was a full garden that basically took up the left side of the infield and most of the left field. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a silly game. You can kind of incorporate anything into it.
You can do whatever you want. Yeah. You're swinging a plastic bat at a plastic ball.
And the plastic ball with holes in just one side of it.
Yeah.
It's a bit, yeah.
And you can do amazing pitches.
Crazy curveballs.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So, what were you really interested in besides being outside, obviously?
Yeah.
Like, what caught your attention, like, through school? Were you a math science kid, or were you...
I was kind of a math science kid, but I don't think. I mean, this isn't not a reflection of my teachers or anything. I had some great teachers, but there was something about just the environment of being in school that didn't really catch my attention. Just that the kind of way of being instructed, of just being inside all the time, and it wasn't really until I was able to get outside on my own that things began to feel more interesting. it's for me like sitting indoors and learning about something. Just it's not the same as kind of experiencing it yourself.
It's nowhere near the same, and you retain a lot more if you experience it.
Yeah. There's some kind of it's such an emotional thing to experience or discover something yourself that it sticks in your brain in such a different way. I found
it's absolutely true for most people, I think.
Yeah.
And you've tapped into it in a real way, like you live each day in that way.
Yeah, I mean, just because that's what kind of makes things seem worth doing, when they feel that fulfilling to learn something yourself.
Isn't it crazy that in 2022 people are still being taught that way?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, that it's hard to come up with a better system, maybe, I guess, for kind of mass education. I don't know, but it does seem, for me, it just wasn't. And again, I don't want to make it sound like I have anything bad to say about my teachers in particular, but just that way of educating for me, and I'm sure for lots of other kids, I mean, we have all these kind of conditions that are kind of invented by our education system, attention deficit disorder, and in other circumstances that might not be a bad thing, but because we've decided that kids have to just sit inside and be quiet in order to learn. That's just not a way that works for everybody.
Yeah, ADD. I mean, the second D is disorder, as you just said. Why is that a disorder?
Right. Yeah, I mean, there are environments where it could probably be
they could flourish.
An advantage. Yeah,
absolutely an advantage.
Yeah.
It's funny. I know plenty of people that consider themselves ADD as children, but they were not labeled that. I'm like, why are you labeling your past?
With
something that's really manufactured by the system, that we all go through.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, you went through public schools. You were Henry Clay?
Henry Clay, John M. Gandy, Liberty, Patrick Henry.
That is a very similar path I followed, except I left Liberty after 7th grade and went to a private school. And in private schools, they still have a very similar system.
Right.
And they absolutely have the flexibility to get out of the classroom, which they do probably more than Patrick Henry or, say, Mechanicsville High School does. But they tend to teach with an older person standing in front of teenagers.
Right. I guess it's just tough to change it up because that's the way it is, and if you try something different and it doesn't go well, you get in a lot more trouble than if you just do the thing that's the way it's done.
Yeah, and it's like trying to turn something 100 times the size of an aircraft carrier.
Right.
Like it's going to take a really long time, and you're going to have serious intent and momentum behind it.
Yeah, that's right.
Kind of thing. But you generally enjoyed going through the Hanover County Public Schools.
Yeah, I mean, as far as school goes, I was glad to be there. I think it's a pretty good system compared to other ones I've seen, heard about. I feel like even though that classroom environment for me wasn't the best fit, I definitely felt like I learned a lot. Met so many people that have shaped my life there. It was a definitely really good formative experience.
Well, and you went to the University of Virginia, which means that you did fairly well, really well, actually, to get into UVA from Western Hanover County, right? I mean,
yeah.
It's not like the school system or you failed each other.
Right. Yeah, I don't mean to make it sound like it was some disaster or anything. It's just because you were asking about that kind of spark of curiosity. That was just something I didn't really feel that strongly in a classroom.
But you excelled in the classic way they were teaching you, despite the fact that you knew that wasn't best.
Yeah, it just wasn't that fun.
Because you want to have fun.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're having fun, you're going to learn.
That's right. Yeah, we kind of have this idea that like school's about not having fun, and it's just about focus. But if you make it fun, then it's so much easier to focus and learn and be successful.
And you're bringing a lot more kids along with you if you're having fun.
Yeah, and life can be really fun. Like learning can be really fun. So we got to tap into that.
Yeah, I'm not the guy that can answer that, but you've probably given it a fair amount of thought, it sounds like.
Yeah, just in terms of my own experiences, and, over the years I've done a lot of talks or done teaching for different ages of kids, from elementary up through college. And, it can be, it's tough to engage different kids of different ages sometimes, but, once you make them see the learning experience as like primarily an adventure, then they kind of stop seeing it as school. And it's just like you get to, our natural instincts are to learn. I mean, especially as a kid, you're like a learning machine. Like
Yeah.
all your brain is built to do is learn. And we kind of
sponge.
stifle
Yeah.
that sometimes.
Yeah, so when you go to these schools, whether it's elementary or college, are you taking the kids outside?
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, sometimes a school will ask me to just come in and do a talk, and then, we'll be in an auditorium and I'll show photos and do a talk. But, it's fun when we get to do a walk. Sometimes we'll do little group walks with the class or something. That's always really fun to do.
That's cool. You had mentioned before we came in the house that you play the trombone, because we were talking to Jeremy outside. It was just a random encounter for us. Were you really into music?
I play the trombone in like band and marching band in middle school and high school. Although I haven't touched one since then. My trombone was like on its last legs by the end of high school. For those who know what a spit valve is, the spit valve.
I play the tuba. So
nice.
Yes.
So the spit valve had fallen off my trombone, and it was kind of a crappy trombone, so I didn't think it was worth fixing. So I just had my solution was I had a wad of silly putty that I wrapped around the hole that the spit came out of to keep it closed.
It works for a while, I imagine.
It worked for the year that I did it. Yeah, poor Mr. Flo, the band director, didn't love the looks of it all, but
not an attractive look.
No, especially in marching band when you're wearing the uniforms and doing the marching the patterns on the field, and you got some guy with silly putty stuck to his trombone.
It's a mix of form and function. Yeah.
Yeah.
You were nailing the function, maybe not the form.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. So you go to UVA. Is it because, like, hey, I'm from Virginia, it's relatively inexpensive if I go to a state school, and it has a great reputation, I get a diploma from there, and I can go do what the world expects me to do?
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much it. Yeah.
And engineering is
engineering, was just, I didn't have any clear idea what to do, and math and science were kind of my strongest subjects. So, probably at the recommendation of my guidance counselor or something, it just, that seemed like a natural fit. So I went into the engineering school my first year at UVA, but not out of any great love for engineering or even understanding of what it was. It just was like, oh, if you're good at math, that's a good thing to go into.
Yeah, I was good at math too, and everybody said you're a boy, you're good at math, you should do engineering. And we're not here to tell my story today, but you end up taking a different path. And I think you end up taking a different path eventually because your brain is not fully formed when you're thinking about going to college and taking, whether it's engineering classes or math classes or whatever it is. But I read an article about you that said you knew as an engineer student at UVA that you did not want to do that long term. Yeah,
or at least that I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know what else to do. But yeah, I always felt like I was, all the time through the engineering school, I was hoping I would figure out what it is I wanted to do before it was too late. And then before I know it, the years have gone by, and now I'm working as an engineer and, still trying to figure out how to not be an engineer. And but there was never, this must happen to tons of kids, maybe most kids, that, you've got to pick something to major in. But
it's an insurance policy, effectively.
Yeah. And how do you know what you want to do when you're that young? It's
no
tough.
Clue. And any kid that says they do know, I mean, and there are exceptions to this,
of
but
course.
Most of them have no clue what they want to do.
Yeah.
I'm 54 and I still don't know what I want to do.
Yeah, I don't know what I want to do.
Yeah. And it's kind of nice not being on this path that your parents or those in your community expected you to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice also to know that, you have this feeling when you're younger that everyone else has figured it out and you're the one who doesn't know. And so I think it's a good message to put out there that none of us know. And
everybody's faking it.
Yeah. And so that, everyone who feels like you're still trying to figure out what you're doing in life, it's okay.
Yeah, it's all okay.
Everyone's in the same place as you.
I plan to die not knowing what I should have done.
Yeah.
and I'm okay with it.
I like that you planned it.
Yeah, I think I am. I've lived enough of life to think, I mean, I'm not going to discover my magical path at age 62. I just don't.
Yeah, there is no magical path. I guess that's the real lesson.
Yeah, that's a great point.
You don't need to know.
What was your experience at UVA outside of the academic experience?
Really, I think that was really the valuable part about going to college. We especially as price of college has gone up and up and up over the years, we've come to think of it as only having value as a thing that helps you get a job. But I feel like most of what's valuable about it is just, meeting a much broader spectrum of people than you're going to meet just in your one hometown. You start to meet people from around the country, from around the world, and
you become worldly because of it.
You become worldly. You just, you're just exposed to so many more ideas than you would be otherwise, just from taking electives in a different department, or just, the fact that you're put in a dorm room with people from all over the place. It's just a way of really expanding your understanding of what the world is, or letting you know that there's so much more to the world than you could ever understand. And it makes you in awe of the world a little bit in that way. If you just grow up in one place and do one thing, maybe you kind of start to think you have everything figured out. And it's nice to know that the world's way, way bigger than you. And there's always going to be things to learn about and discover, and makes things feel kind of magical in that way.
And if you've only lived in the same town and worked in the same town or the same general vicinity, the rest of the world's pretty scary.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And, that applies to whether it's going to college or just traveling somewhere, anything that gets you out of your comfort zone really starts to teach you that all these things that seemed scary aren't.
They're not at all.
Yeah.
And so we're going to come back to this, of course, but you've walked 99% of the streets of New York. And when I say streets, I should use air quotes, because you've walked cemeteries, you've walked shorelines.
Right.
And you've been in I've watched a lot of TV in my life, and there have been thousands of shows based in New York City. And a lot of them say that you should be scared of parts of the city.
Definitely.
And you've walked all the streets, and you've not been...
Yeah, I
harmed one time, right?
That's right. Yeah, I've never been mugged or anything like that. You're right. You start to see what it is that drives TV ratings and things, and things have to be portrayed a certain way because that's what draws people's attention. And if you hear about a city on the news these days, it's usually about how crime's so high, and it's kind of just in someone's financial interest to paint that city as a super dangerous place, and then that makes people go, oh my God, this is terrifying. I got to tell my friends to watch this thing, and it just builds on itself.
Yeah, I guess it sells. I guess people make money by doing that, but it's I don't know. Part of me enjoys that entertainment, and part of me says it's completely made up and it's fiction. But muggings do happen.
Of course, yeah. It's not completely made up. It's just based on a little bit of reality and then blown out of proportion.
So when you walk into a part of town that would scare the average person who's either from New York or not from New York, are you intentionally trying to disarm people as you're walking through, or are you more reactive?
Yeah, I think that over the years, and when I first moved to New York, people would tell me, so I moved to New York, and I was still working as a civil engineer for a number of years while I was living there, and I was like a roadway engineer, streets and highways and stuff like that. And so that just kind of took me to neighborhoods all over the city, because the company I was working for, just did different projects here and there, and I'd have to go various places. And, a lot of them were in neighborhoods that people at work would tell me, be careful, this neighborhood's really dangerous, And so when you first move to a place and people tell you that, you believe them, because, what do you know? You just moved there. They're the experts.
Yeah.
And so, I really had the experience of going from like being very scared of certain places, just to speak frankly, as a white guy, they were saying, this is a black neighborhood. You're a white guy. Sure. It's dangerous there. That's the kind of ideas we have in our head. And so, there was a progression over my life of like being scared and then starting to realize, well, now I've had to interact with this person, and like, they're all really the same. They're just also trying to go to work and, take care of their family and do like all the exact things that every other person in the world's trying to do. And so I think it's kind of just a natural process of becoming more comfortable because you understand that you're the same as everybody else. And then that makes you, that just naturally makes you more confident in a place because you start to understand that you're not really different from anybody else. And then that, that confidence changes the way that you project yourself, and that probably makes people more comfortable with you being there. And so it's a hard thing to just fake acting a certain way. It just becomes natural to realize that you're not scared, and that in and of itself kind of makes you disarming to people. That, you know, if you seem comfortable somewhere, people are comfortable with you.
Yeah.
And so it kind of mutually happens, you know, between you and the environment you're in.
And you're coming from a positive place.
Yeah. You know, the way you just said that made me think of kind of my greatest inspiration in all my walking. I didn't learn about her until after I'd done my cross country walk. But there was a woman. I think her birth name was Mildred Norman, and she, you know, she had I think a fairly normal life. And I think she'd been married and then, you know, got divorced. And when she was 45 years old, this was in 1953, she kind of had ditched her previous identity. She just renamed herself Peace Pilgrim. She got rid of everything.
This is the 50s.
Yeah, this is 1953, a 45-year-old woman. Renamed herself Peace Pilgrim. She got rid of everything she owned, like all her money, everything, except the clothes she was wearing and the things in her pockets. And she decided she was going to walk across America. She had this idea that, you know, the reason we don't have peace in the world is because people are not at peace with themselves. You know, we have this inner turmoil, and that leads us to getting into conflict with other people because we're not at peace with who we are ourselves. And so her idea was, I'm going to walk across America. I don't have anything. I'm just going to walk until people offer me a place to stay or something to eat. Otherwise, I'm just going to sleep beside the road and I'll fast until someone gives me food. And anyone who stops to talk to me, I'm just going to talk to them about my ideas for how to find peace in the world. And so she was, you know, completely dependent on the kindness of strangers. And so she starts, I think, if I remember correctly, I think she started marching in the Rose Bowl parade on like January 1st, 1953.
I wish I knew this lady.
I know. And then she, you know, turns east and makes her way across America. And she makes it all the way across America without a cent to her name. And then she just turns around and does this again and again for the rest of her life. The last 28 years of her life, she just spends walking back and forth and around America, talking to people about peace. People are just taking her in, taking care of her. And so as you can imagine, she has, you know, accrued a lot of wisdom over that time. And one of the things she said that sticks with me the most is she said, I think this is the exact quote, the world is like a mirror. If you smile at it, it smiles back at you. And that gets to what you were saying about like bringing a lot of positivity into, you know, interactions with strangers, because what her mirror quote made me realize is that, you know, a lot of times if you meet someone on the street, you think that you're just experiencing that person, right? If it goes well, that's a nice person. If it doesn't go well, like that person's a jerk. But you are half of the interaction. So if that person's 5% nice person and 95% jerk, and you're 100% nice person, you get the majority of that interaction to be positive. Yeah. So I do think that's a really important point that we don't think about. We think about, especially when you travel, you think you're in someone else's world and you're just experiencing their world. But you can bring a lot of positivity to all those interactions and take a lot that may have been on the fence that could have gone positively or negatively, and just by your own energy and your own, you know, your own personality, you can kind of make it a good interaction.
Imagine if everybody came in with 100% positivity. You'd have 200% positivity in every interaction.
Exactly.
I mean, how powerful is that?
Exactly. It is. Powerful is the right word, too, you know, because in some ways it doesn't seem powerful because you're just being kind of, in some ways, meek, you know, letting the other person take control. Like you're there to listen. You're there to ask questions, to show them that you care about them and you know, let them be the dominant force in the interaction. But it actually is very powerful. You know, we have a lot of control over that we don't realize a lot of times.
And that interaction, I mean, you're an entity. You're together in that moment.
Exactly.
So it's not about one versus the other.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. You kind of combine into one thing for the course of that interaction.
Whether it's a minute or 20 minutes or whatever it is.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know, you never know how. I mean, a minute of a person having a positive interaction with you can change your day.
Yeah.
You know. It can make your day go from crappy to great.
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe even put somebody on a different path.
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many times just a 30-second interaction I've had with someone who just said something funny to me on the street, like, makes my day so much better. And you think about it all day. Like, you have to text your friend because it was such a funny thing. And, like, it just sets you off on this whole great path for the rest of your day.
Yeah, but you can't manufacture it, right?
That's right.
It has to happen naturally.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so I love the Peace Pilgrim story, and I love the mirror analogy. Are you thinking about a name change?
We'll see. I can't. I gotta wait till I got a good one before I start putting it out there.
She seemed like she was amazing in a lot of different ways, but she's also pretty good at marketing.
Yeah, I mean, she and in a very subtle way. You know, I mean, she had like a jacket. I've seen photos. I don't know if she wore it from the very start of her walk or not. But she just had basically a jacket that she always wore, and you know, she had her. I mean, the things in her pockets was just like, you know, a comb and a toothbrush and like pen and paper, like most basic stuff. But her jacket on the back of it said, you know, something like walking across America for peace, or walking X number of miles for peace, or something like that.
That was her brand.
Yeah. But, you know, I mean, this was obviously way before the internet existed. So, you know, she was kind of word of mouth spread about her. That's something I learned in my cross country walk. You know, you move so slow on foot. So if you're in a rural area, which almost all of America is, you know, you draw any line across America, most of that line is rural.
You might run into two cities.
Exactly. So like the vast majority of my walk across America was rural areas. So there'd be like a town with a main road that ran through it. And so the amount of time it takes me to walk on that main road, pass through the town, get out the other side of the town, most people who live around there have probably passed me on the road 4 times in their car, because it takes a couple days to get all the way through there on foot. So people start to, you know, wonder who you are. They start to talk to each other. There'd be the people who'd stop and they just want to know what I was doing, you know, probably so that they could tell their friend who the weird guy is.
I'm now in the know.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that kind of thing probably happened with Peace Pilgrim, where like people were like, I got to know who this woman is. And so that is a way of, you know,
powerful word of mouth.
Yeah, it is. And she would get, you know, invited on a lot of radio shows or TV programs, you know, just to talk about what she was doing. And she'd take all those opportunities because, you know, again, her whole kind of mission in life was just to spread the idea of how to find, you know, inner peace. And so she would always be taking these opportunities to go talk to people. And another thing I really remember about her that always struck me was, you know, she'd get invited on like some of the morning radio shows. It's like the Zoo Crew kind of, and you know, they'd invite her in just thinking we'll make fun of this silly lady and like all our listeners will have a good chuckle. And from my understanding, just there's a book about Peace Pilgrim that some of her friends put out after she died, and you can actually just write to them and they'll send you a copy of it for free. And it's a compilation of, you know, she never wrote a book, but it's a compilation of articles she wrote, interviews with her, biographical information. It's a kind of a mishmash of stuff about her. And one thing I remember reading in that book was that so she'd go on these radio shows and they'd kind of try to poke fun at her, you know, this crazy hippie lady, and they just find it impossible to make fun of her because she believed so strongly what she was doing. There was no weakness, there was no insecurity in her. So whatever they'd ask her, even if it was some kind of leading question that was just supposed to make her sound silly, she just kind of try to answer it generously and, you know, try to help them in answering it. You know, she'd try to help them find their own inner peace.
They became enamored with her.
Yeah. So she did have a lot of, you know, it seemed like she's just doing such a simple thing, but there's a lot to it when you start to kind of delve into what she was doing.
I'm going to awkwardly jump back to college. So your insurance policy of getting an engineering degree became an engineering job, still an insurance policy, because that you knew that was not the path. When did you start daydreaming about walking across the country?
I guess I'd always had different thoughts about what else I could be doing beside engineering, and you know, I just never. It's hard, you know, when you have a job that's a fine job, right? It's not like it was terrible to go to work every day. So nothing about my job forced me out of it. It was just each day was fine. But when I think about if I was still doing this 20 years from now, then that'd make me feel kind of bad. But, you know, so I kept having ideas about what else I could do, but not following through on them because it's easy enough to keep going to work and it's a reliable paycheck and all that. So I think the walking thing probably, you know, I mean, I did a lot of walking around New York. That was kind of my thing I would do in my free time. You know, for me, it was like getting to New York and looking at the subway map. And the subway system's so huge in New York. You know,
it's massive.
It doesn't quite cover the whole city, but it still covers a huge amount of land. And so looking at, you know, especially the stations way out at the ends of the line, you know, they seemed like these kind of mythical places, and I'd want to get out there and like see what that place looks like on foot. And so over the years, I started doing a lot of walking around the city, and that started making me think, like, instead of spending all day just walking in New York, what if I put together a bunch of these all-day walks and I walked somewhere really far away instead of just always looping back around within the same city. So it was maybe like 2007 or 8. I probably started just vaguely think. I just have these images in my head while I was at my desk of like walking across the Great Plains or something. The sun's low in the sky and there's the amber fields of amber fields of grain of wheat, whatever the phrase is from the song. All around me, and a
couple American flags waving.
Yeah, exactly. Some bald eagles flying overhead, screeching, dropping American pies on my lap. But yeah, so I had this kind of image, I guess, first, and then I do remember it must have been like spring of 2008. I just had the kind of concrete thought of could I walk across America? Is that a thing I could do? And because I remember, because I looked it up on my computer at work, and I was like, is this something you can do? Can you walk across America? And I found the website of this guy, Gary House, and he had done it. And it's one of those things where, like, you're not sure if something's possible, and then you hear that one person did it, and all of a sudden your brain changes and says, okay, now it's possible. Now I can do it. It's not any more or less possible because he did it, but now that you know it's possible, everything seems different. So that it was about spring of 2008, and the thing that kind of I think allowed me to actually do this walk, as opposed to all the other half-baked ideas I had before, was that I gave myself an actual deadline. I said, okay, 1 year from today, I have to have either found a new job or like figured out very clearly a new field, a new career path. If I haven't done those things a year from now, I have to quit my job and I have to do this walk. And I told...
How old were you at the time?
20, I guess, almost 28.
Okay.
And so I told all my friends about this plan. So that kind of put the peer pressure on me.
It became real.
Yeah. So then when the year came and went, and I, of course, hadn't done anything to find a new job, I had told all these people that, hey, I'm going to be quitting my job. It seemed safe at the time. A year. I got a year. I'll find a new job in a year. I'm not going to have to do this. But then, I hadn't done anything. And so spring of 2009 came around, and I quit. And it ended up taking basically another year to kind of get everything together for the cross-country walk, get over my fear of doing it. And then, spring of 2010 is when I started out on that walk.
And it took you planned for 9 months, but it took you 5 months.
Took 5 months. Yeah, I thought it could take me up to 9 months. I was trying to figure out kind of the sweet spot of when to do it, where, the main thing weather-wise I was concerned about is being on like icy roads and cars sliding into me and hitting me. So, I couldn't start right in the winter in New York. I had to wait until I knew I wasn't likely going to hit a snowstorm, and then I had to kind of time it so that I could get past the Rocky Mountains before the snows hit there. That was kind of the window I was figuring.
Is that why you took the northern route, effectively?
Well, I was going to be walking through summer, so I just wanted to try to avoid the hottest of the hot weather. But also, I knew I was going to be starting at Rockaway Beach. That's a beach in Queens, in New York City, and it's kind of in New York City, it's the beach that's like most out on the open ocean. So I definitely wanted to start there. And I wasn't sure where I was going to go, and I was just looking at maps of the Pacific coast, and I saw there's a town in Oregon called Rockaway Beach.
The symmetry's hard to pass.
Yeah, so I said, okay, that's definitely where I'm going. So that in and of itself kind of set me on a bit of a northern route. And I also wanted to go visit my brother in Chicago on the way. So that locked in to some extent where I was going to be walking.
Was Chicago the only city you hit?
No, I went through, let's see. So, left New York. Chicago was like the first major city I hit. I also went through Madison, Wisconsin, kind of smallish, but still big, pretty major city. I went through Minneapolis, and then Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
Those were the major cities I walked through.
And you went through those states in the summer, you said?
Yeah.
I don't think you could do it in the winter.
That would be tough. I mean, it would be tough both just the physical conditions, but also just the danger of being on the road when there's not, there's. I mean, I was worried enough about getting hit by a car anyway. That was my main fear in the whole walk, more than like people attacking me or bears or whatever. You know, there were kind of more, those are more visceral things that other people I think were worried about when I told them about what I was going to be doing. But I think realistically, the biggest danger is just a car hitting you.
Do you worry about cars now?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a healthy degree. You don't want to ever let your guard down on that.
You can't be oblivious to it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't live in fear of them, but you always want to keep in mind that there are things that weigh 2 tons that are flying down the road right next to you.
They're going to win.
Yeah, they're going to win.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as people are on their phones texting and all that while they're driving, I think most people are decent drivers.
But not all of them.
But definitely not all. Definitely not all. Yeah. But I haven't had any particularly close calls.
You don't own a car, right? Or do you?
I do, actually.
Okay.
It's my parents' old car, but I use it as like a storage unit. This is how like ridiculous.
Oh, I'm so glad I asked this question.
Oh yeah, so it's kind of a silly thing. Like it really shouldn't make sense for me to have a car that I don't really drive, that's basically just a trunk on wheels for me to keep extra stuff in. Like I can keep my off-season clothes in there. I have camping stuff in there, things that like I don't necessarily need, but it makes life a little easier. And because you can park on the street for free, it just economically makes sense, which is dumb. Like there shouldn't be, like I shouldn't be subsidized by taxpayers to build these roads and for me to be able to leave a car for free on them with stuff in the trunk. It's so stupid, but until they change it, like it's too attractive not to do. Yeah. So I would be like, in New York, there's so much public space taken up by cars just sitting there that people are not paying for, which I think people should have to pay to park their cars. There's very valuable real estate.
You pay for everything else.
Yeah. I mean, those spaces could be parks for people. Like they could be so many great things. So I'm in favor of not being allowed to do what I'm doing, but until they change it, it just makes too much sense not to do it.
It'll be ironic until they change it.
Exactly. I should have to have a storage unit or something, or just not have this stuff. Like that's the way it should be, but it's not. It's silly.
Am I the first person that figured that out?
Not the first, but yeah. I mean, reasonably, you would assume I don't have a car because it wouldn't seem to make any sense. But yeah,
your brand is not anti-car, but certainly not.
A little bit. I mean, yeah. Like I don't like that I have the car. It's just like it makes the most sense because it's a place I can store stuff and I can move it around when I need to, and it works for me, but it shouldn't.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What did you learn about people on your cross-country trip?
Oh man, so much. Well, let me just kind of fill in a little of the backstory, I guess. So the basic idea of my walk was, I have this cart that I'm pushing all my stuff in. This is an idea I got from Gary House, the guy I mentioned, the first guy I heard about.
It's like a stroller.
It's a stroller. It's a jogging stroller, but without the stroller seat. So it's the frame of a jogging stroller, and I put a little wooden platform on the bottom of it, and I had like a big, I don't remember, 20-gallon or whatever it is, like a big plastic container on it that had most of my stuff and, kept everything dry in the rain. And then I had a few other little bags and a little cooler and things like that on it. So I'm pushing this cart across America, and I'd walk until, it'd get late in the day.
Was there any fanfare when you left Rockaway Beach, New York?
I had started a walking group in New York a couple years before I left. And so I would just post about it on this like email list, and random people would show up and they'd come out for like a 20-mile walk on a Saturday through some other neighborhood that, we hadn't been to before. So over the years, I met a lot of people through that. So I had a big group of friends who were also big walkers by the time I started out on the cross country walk. So yeah, a bunch of my friends were there for the first day of the walk. And New York's such a big city, and if you're starting all the way in Rockaway Beach, it's it took me 2 days just to get out of New York City.
It's amazing.
Because of the way the bridges are and stuff, you have to walk like all the way up to the George Washington Bridge at the very northern part of Manhattan to get out of New York City. So that first day in New York, I had a bunch of friends with me. And then after that, it was, more solitary. But yeah, so the idea was, I'll walk until it gets late in the day, and then I'll just start knocking on people's doors and asking if I could camp in their yards.
And you had never asked anybody to do something like that before, had you?
I had done a little, like a practice run on a bicycle. A friend and I took maybe it was a 4-day bike trip, and I was like, let me test this theory out. And, this way we'll be on bikes, so like if it's really hard to find a place to stay, we can probably cover a lot more ground and get to a lot more houses and eventually find somewhere to stay. And it worked like a charm. So the very first day of the bike trip, it was this really rainy day. And, it was finally the end of the day. The rain had stopped, but it was like we didn't really, we were just a little worried about we were going to be soaking wet all night. Like, it'd be so nice if we could find somewhere maybe a little bit dry to stay. And we biked by this farmhouse, and there was like maybe a little, I can't remember, maybe like a little barn out in the yard or something. Anyway, it looked like maybe this would be a good place we could stay. And we go up and knock on the door, and this like giant loud dog comes flying down the stairs. And I was like, oh my God, is this what it's going to be like? But then like right after the dog, this young woman in like pigtails comes like skipping down the stairs and opens the door, and we're like, oh, we're doing this bike ride. Is there any way we could camp here? And she's like, oh yeah, you could stay here. Come on in. I'm going to my friend's house for dinner. You guys want to come with me? You could take showers first, warm up, dry off your clothes, and like
it's the lottery of asking.
Yeah, and it was like the first try, the first time I'd ever tried this, and it just was like that. And so that gave me some faith that this will work out. Yeah, so I had this idea that walking across America, I thought, okay, maybe I'll have to knock on 10 doors each night to find a place to stay. Like, I have faith that 1 in 10 people will let me stay with them. And it ended up being so much easier. It was like 3 out of 4 people, 75% yeses. So most of the time I just knock on 1 door and I got a place to stay.
Did you ever form a profile for what would be more successful or likely to be successful?
All I tried to do, I just realized that if I just acted with confidence, and you want to go with the short and sweet kind of spiel. You don't want to like talk on and on. That makes people start to wonder where you're coming from. I'd say the same thing every night. I'd have a big smile on my face, and I'd say, hey, I'm Matt. I'm walking across America. Would you mind if I camp in your yard for the night? And, the kind of typical response would be the person would be like a little bit confused, but they'd be like, well, I guess you could, sure. And then they'd kind of, walk out in the yard, and we kind of figure out where's a good place to put a tent. And we'd be talking while we're doing that, and I'd open up my cart and take my tent out, and they'd see that I have like actual camping stuff in there and not, dead bodies or machine guns or anything. And so it's like, within a few minutes, they're like, oh, okay, this is actually kind of cool. Like, it was a little weird at first, but this is kind of interesting. A guy's walking across America, he's staying at my house. Like, yeah. Oh, you know what? I bet he's hungry. Like, let me invite him in for dinner. And so a lot of times it would unfold like that, a little bit gradually, and we'd go from like confusion or maybe a little bit of wariness to like, hey, why don't you come in? Like, we'll have dinner together. And, oh, I bet you must need to take a shower. How would they know I need to take a shower? Who knows? Some people would let me do my laundry there. Like, sometimes people would, they'd invite me in for breakfast the next morning. They'd pack me a lunch for the next day. And these would be people from all across all the spectrums, the political spectrum, the religious spectrum. I mean, most of rural America is white, but,
sure.
Different people of all different races I met on my walk too. And, like I was talking about earlier, you do start to understand how much more in common we all have. And, we have differences, but there's so much on the surface compared to just what it is to be a human. I mean, that's the bulk of our experience that we all share. And I started to realize that there were so many of the people I was staying with, if all that I knew about them was their political views, I would have a certain opinion about them. And I realized that most strangers in the world, you don't know that much about them. You hear they voted for this person or they believe this thing, and your brain just puts them in a bucket right away. Either like that's a good person or that's a bad person. And we write people off so quickly. You learn one thing about them, you're like, what a jerk. Like, that's what's wrong with America, people like that. And I had so many of those people who maybe that's what I would have said about them. But they took me into their house. They took this stranger into their house and fed him dinner. And, sometimes they'd say terrible things in the course of this. They'd say something really racist. And so, but I have to realize, like, all these things can exist within one person. Like, a person can seem really offensive to you and also seem like the most generous person in the world. And you can't always decide if a person's good or bad. Like, we're all such a jumbled mix of humanity. And you just have to accept that, like, there are people who do good and bad at the same time. Like, for example, me or you or all of us. Like, we all want to do better. And, we all have things we're good at and great things we've done. We've all had things we're ashamed of. And, it's hard to internalize that lesson. And that was probably the biggest thing I learned on my walk, is that we all have the capacity for incredible generosity. And everyone was showing that to me on my walk. I mean, so many people were just taking care of me. And it wasn't just the people that I was asking for help, asking if I could stay with them, knocking on their door. People would just see this. I looked crazy, right? I was pushing a jogging stroller. I had a reflective vest on. I had this like ridiculous doofy hat on to keep the sun off my face. I had this sign on the front of my cart. It said, "We may never meet again." I'd gotten this idea from this friend of like, it's kind of a beautiful idea that like, this might be our only interaction.
We should cherish this moment, yeah.
But, it could read it, just seeing someone with that on a cart, like, probably looks pretty crazy. And I would have thought, on average, people are probably going to be wary of me. Like, I don't, I look like a nutball. But people would just stop their cars and, like, offer me food or money. People would they just say, like, this guy looks like he needs help. Let me help him. Like, what an amazing thing that we don't think that exists in America.
Oh, it absolutely exists.
Yeah. Like,
it just doesn't sell.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it wasn't even just the people I was asking for help were helping me. The people I didn't ask would just say, "That guy looks like he needs help." And yeah, that just reminded me that like outside of like true psychopaths, that everybody has the capacity and desire to help other people. Like, it makes us feel good to do it, and that exists across all political divides and ideological divides. And man, I like just over the past 6, 10, whatever years, having those experiences as our countries become more politically polarized it's just helped keep me sane, to remember like there's so many things pushing us apart, but like when you get out there and have an actual physical experience in the world with other people, that's when you remember how much we have in common and how much the divides we have are kind of manufactured by people and parties with their own interests
that are manipulating us for
power
or money or what, or
both.
But
individual humans want to help each other and be kind to each other.
So your assessment of humanity by the end of your cross-country journey sounds pretty positive.
Very positive, yeah. Like we have the capability to do terrible things, but I don't think that's our natural instinct. I think lacking those circumstances that push us to be at our worst, I think we're all pretty good underneath.
Other than the psychopaths.
Yeah, other than even them, you gotta have sympathy for them too.
And you don't know they're a psychopath until they prove they're a psychopath.
That's right.
Was anybody at Rockaway Beach, Oregon, when you finished?
Yes. I had a blog that I was keeping on my walk, and I just, it was fairly simple. I just post some photos from my, that was 2010, so I just got my first smartphone, right? So I could take photos and post them and do all that while I was walking. Right? It was amazing, yeah. And so people started following that blog, and some are, one of the people or some of the people got in touch with like the Chamber of Commerce in Rockaway Beach, Oregon. So they had this little party for me. They had this beautiful cake with like an outline of the United States in my path, like marked really cool. on it.
That's great.
They like had like a cookout on the like a barbecue out on the beach when we finished. So yeah,
that's really cool.
It was really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to finish that.
Yeah, it's very like small town pride kind of thing.
Man. I was worried you were just gonna. It was kind of you by yourself there.
I mean, in some ways that would have been nice too. To just be, it's tough because it's not really a triumphant thing when you end a journey like that. Like, it's the end point, but it's not like anything's changed, And it's nice sometimes to just have some quiet time to reflect on what's happened to you.
Because you're an introvert.
Yeah, I am very much, yeah. But But at the same time, it's nice to have a small town come out and just be excited and show you a lot of love.
I mean the smile on your face. I mean, our listening audience can't see it.
It's making me think of Ashland. It's the kind of thing Ashland would do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it was nice.
Very cool. All right, so you went to New York for a job. It sounds like. Yeah,
a job, and kind of tied in with that. The woman I was dating at the time was going to be in school there, so we kind of. I actually worked in Northern Virginia for like a year out of college, and then was able to transfer within my company, and she was just starting school there at that time.
So you moved to New York for a girl?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, 2005.
Okay. Did you fall in love with the city?
Yeah, definitely. It took a few months. It's such a. I mean, I was coming from Northern Virginia and like had spent time, in DC, and so it's not hugely different from DC, but it is a good bit bigger, and it takes time to just adjust, especially coming from a little town, spending almost all my life, in the little town.
Your dad's from New York, though, right?
My dad's from Brooklyn. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you have family up there?
I have some cousins still up there. Most, like, my dad's father immigrated to New York, and his mother's parents did. So when he was growing up, all the family was around. They'd all come through Ellis Island, and so there was a really big family contingent there when he was growing up, and I still have some cousins there. But a lot of our families moved out in the years since. So
I had mentioned earlier you're at 99% walking, like ridiculous. I can't even fathom walking all of New York City. Has anybody else done this, by the way?
There's a guy, Bill Helmrich, who I didn't learn about him till a couple years into my walk. It's funny because when I started this, so this is the walking every block in all 5 boroughs of New York City, thousands of miles, and maybe it sounds like a crazy thing to do, but when I was starting it, I was like, how is no one else doing this? Like, this is the greatest idea in the world. And I was like, I'd look online, I'm like, how is nobody else doing this? And then I found a couple of years in, like, another guy had been doing it also. He had a little bit of a different kind of perspective on it. He was a sociologist, was a professor. And he wanted to write. He ended up writing a book about the city, and then also individual ones about each borough. So he kind of had this idea to do this walk and kind of create these books about. He called it. Oh God, now I'm going to blank on it. It's called like the New York Nobody Knows. So just this idea of like the parts of New York that don't make the media. The parts you're not going to see on the news. So anyway, eventually he and I met. And so that was cool to meet someone who's doing, we're both very similar and very different. So to meet someone doing the same thing, but kind of from their own point of view. And he was a good bit older. He was in his late 60s when we met. And he died in the pandemic. Actually, he was back in the early days, March 2020. He was the first person I knew who got COVID and died pretty early on. Yeah. So that was pretty tragic. But I was so glad to have known him for the years that I did.
And he was walking paved streets of New York. You expanded beyond that.
Yeah. I say walking every street just because otherwise it takes like an hour to describe it. So that's kind of the streamlined version. But yeah, the idea is really like walk all the kind of public, open outdoor areas. Okay. So yeah, it could mean beaches, boardwalks, bridges, cemeteries, parks, just all these big spaces that may not have literal streets in them, but have places you can walk.
Public access. Anywhere you could go.
Yeah, anywhere I could go. Because some of them there's public and private places, but if I can go there, then I count it.
Do you go to private places?
Yeah,
even though they may not want you there.
Yes. Then there's varying degrees. There's private places that are open to the public. There's private places that are not open to the public but don't care if the public goes there. There's private places that kind of care, but they don't care that much. Like there's a security guard, but I just walk in and the security guard's lazy and doesn't care. And
how dangerous could you actually be?
Yeah. So, but that's the vague idea. Like, all the kind of publicly accessible places.
So what's left to get to 100%?
So it's a little bit spread out around the city. There's a couple of areas that I just haven't walked yet. A handful of like kind of full day walks, which might mean like, 15, 20 mile walks to fill in a few gaps in the map. But a lot of what's left is places that have been built since I started. So, it could be a neighborhood that I walked 10 years ago. Now there's a new development there. There's such a housing shortage in New York. There's all kinds of neighborhoods.
Every time there's a new neighborhood built, it just adds to the distance.
Yeah. And people say, well, couldn't you just make a rule that you don't have to? Well, and I'm like, have to? Like, I want to. Like, this is... Yeah. Like, that's what's great.
This is what I do.
I don't have to do any of this. Like, this is just me making up an insane thing to do in my life. Like, I don't have to do it. So I love doing it. It's like a good reason to go back to a place that I'd been before, and I quote unquote finished it. But now I can go back and kind of see what it looks like these days. And other places are like cemeteries, for example. When I first started, I'd kind of just make a nominal like loop through the cemetery and say, okay, I walk the cemetery. And then the year since, I thought like I should walk those cemeteries more carefully. Not necessarily every path, because the paths in the cemetery are like way more dense than the street network.
Right.
But I want to fill in the map more in that cemetery. So just the other day, like before I came down to Virginia, there's a cemetery called St. Michael's Cemetery where Scott Joplin, the guy who wrote The Entertainer, he's buried there. I had known about that when I first walked it. I had just done like one little loop through the cemetery, so I went back there to kind of fill in the picture more. Visit Scott Joplin. There was a funeral going on there, and there were a bunch of cars parked there, and like a third of them were taxi cabs. And it turns out the guy who died was a taxi driver. So a lot of his fellow drivers were there. To see him off.
Very New York.
Yeah, it was. It was the first time I'd seen that. So yeah, this always, it's not like I have to go back and do anything. It's always good. And I find like the more pointless something seems, let me give you an example. So there was this park in Staten Island that originally it was going to be part of the street grid, and there were going to be houses and stuff built there. And they had actually built the streets and some of the infrastructure, like, drains and fire hydrants and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And then it just never got built. And I don't know if it was either turned back to the city or maybe the city owned it all along. Whatever it was, they eventually just decided this will be parkland and we'll just kind of abandon these streets. And so there's this park with like these decades-old crumbling streets in it. And it's almost all gone, but some of the curbs still there, some of the concrete. You can still find the streets within the park. It's just woods.
It was in the documentary, right?
This one was not. But I know what you're talking about. Yeah. That's a different abandoned area. Yeah, that one's down by the beach.
Gotcha.
This one is way less obvious. Like it's been decades, it's almost all taken over by forest now. But you can kind of find the curb and you can kind of walk some of the old streets. And I was like, well, I'm walking streets. Let me try to walk all the streets in this park. And I'm doing it. And some of them are a little more obvious than others. It's really hard to figure out where the street was. You kind of look here and there. Oh, you find something. Oh, there's like I don't remember. There's a fire hydrant or whatever. Some sign that like, okay, I'm still on the street. And part of my brain is like, why are you doing this? Like, these aren't streets. Why are you spending so much time trying to find these like fake streets inside this park? And like, I had other walking I had to finish before it got dark that day. And I'm like, should I really be spending this much time trying to find these old streets? And every time I think like, am I wasting time? I always then come upon something that I wouldn't have found if I hadn't been doing that. And so I'm walking down this like phantom street, and off to my right, there's like this kind of pathway defined by, on each side of the pathway, there's like these lines, these like almost sculptural forms of like fallen tree branches and stuff. Someone's like put them all together and like paved this path with them. So they're like lining both sides of the path. These big woven like tree branches that had fallen. This is in the winter, so like there's no greenery. So I start just seeing what this path's all about. So I start following this winding path between these tree branches, and the tree branches lining the path start getting more and more ornate. Like they're tall, they're like woven together, and they start getting tall. Like they're I know this is a terrible description. They're like almost like sculptures. These wooden sculptures of tree branches start rising up off of the ground, and they swirl around, and they end up at this like structure someone's built in the middle of this abandoned park. It's like a little hut made out of 1 million tree branches. I don't know how long it would have taken someone just to collect all this wood that they used to build this thing. And it was just someone's little hangout or art project or something, And I never would have found this thing if I hadn't been walking these like disappearing roads that existed 50 years ago in this park.
And I imagine you were the 5th person to even know it existed.
Yeah, exactly. Except, this blew my mind. Some years later, I was doing this thing on Reddit, Ask Me Anything, where like they have someone come in, and usually it's, or at least the more popular ones will be some public figure, a celebrity or an expert in some field or something. And they do Ask Me Anything, which means all the users can just ask them any question they want, and they'll try to answer as many of them as they can. So I was doing one of these about walking to New York City, and I tell the story about this park, and some guy's like, oh, I think I've seen that before. And another person's like, tell me where it is. I'm going to go try to find it. And by the end of the day, like one of these users has gone out. I couldn't even remember the name of the park. And he went out and found the park and found the thing in the park and like sent photos of it. And I was just amazed.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Away. But yeah, probably a very small number of people have ever found this thing because the park's not that used to begin with. And then to just stumble upon this thing, probably, what are the odds of you finding that thing even if you do go in the park? Because it's a pretty big wooded park.
And you have that experience and that memory for the rest of your life.
And but that's all just to say that's the kind of thing. Anytime I find myself thinking like, is this pointless what I'm doing? I immediately find something like, no, it's not pointless. Like, and that's taught me that, there's no wasted footstep in life. Every step you take, every bit of effort you put into doing something, even if you don't know why, it's in the end, it's rewarded.
And you enjoy running into what most people, I think, take for granted as they're whizzing by in their car. Like you see a butterfly that probably nobody has recognized in weeks or months. You take joy in taking the picture of it, and the fact you discovered it, I imagine, is appealing to you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That is kind of the magic of walking, like of just going that slowly. That's kind of the speed that our brains evolved to understand the world in, right? We moved at walking speed up until very recently in human history.
Very recently, yeah.
So that's how we know how to be in the world when you're not moving any faster than you can walk.
And it's more enjoyable.
Yeah, it's more enjoyable just because that's when you can register what's going on around you. In a car, a field just looks like a field. That's driving through farmland in a car can be pretty boring because it's just field, field, field. And on foot, it's like plant, butterfly, bird call, smell of cow manure, rain falling on me, like all these things. The world gets so much more like dense with information when you move slowly and you're not inside a vehicle.
I have a feeling I know the answer to this question. When you started your cross-country trip, back to that trip real quickly, did you touch the water? Yeah. And then you touched the water on the other side?
Yeah, I had to submerge myself in the ocean at either end.
Really?
Yeah.
Completely?
Completely.
I was thinking you put your...
Dip a toe in or something. Yeah. I'm all about the polar bear swims. I've always loved doing that.
Do you do those now?
Yeah. In fact... a friend and I have this kind of semi-annual tradition in New York where we celebrate New Year's Eve by doing like a long walk, and then we jump in the ocean at like Coney Island or something
That's cool.
to celebrate the new year. And a handful of other friends will come with us. So,
are you a cold shower guy?
No, I'm not really into the cold showers. I like plunging in the cold water, screeching, and running out and drying off.
Getting dry as quickly as possible.
Yeah. I don't mind a nice warm shower though. I'm a wimp in that way.
I'm definitely a warm shower guy.
Yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
Do you have what's your fondest memory of walking the streets of New York?
You
may have just told me, but I don't.
Yeah, it's just been so many years. I don't know that there's one.
How about recently?
I could just tell you. Yeah, well, this is a good story. I don't know. This kind of, I guess, combines a few different aspects of it. Maybe that's why it's a good one. So, so there's a neighborhood at the western end of Coney Island, which, you've probably heard of Coney Islands being like the amusement park where they do the Nathan's hot dog eating contest, all that. But, it was a physical island at one point. Now it's connected to the rest of Brooklyn, so it's a peninsula. But whatever. It's a big landmass. So at the very western end of it is a completely gated neighborhood. I have no idea. It's probably a few thousand people or something lives in this.
Like a small
town.
Like
a small town. Yeah. So a big area. And it's really the only place of that size that's gated, that's like fully gated in New York City, by which I mean like it's not just like there's a sign that says this is for residents only, or like a guard booth where the guard doesn't care if you walk in. Like this place is entirely fenced off, and because it's at the end of the peninsula, one long fence runs along it, and that physically separates it from all the other land. So to get in there, unless you like go around the fence at the end, you have to go through one of two entry points in the fence, and there are guards there, and they're very serious, and they won't let you come in.
These are where all the powerful people in America live.
Maybe used to probably. Okay. It's like it's one of these. It's evolved over time, and it's not as fancy as it sounds anymore.
Gotcha.
But they still have the infrastructure to try to keep people out of it. So anyway, there's other like small gated communities in New York where it's just a few streets, and like they have a physical gate that you can't get through. But this is the only like big community that really physically restricts access to it. And so I was never sure what I was going to try to do about it, because I'm like, does that really count as part of New York City if they're trying to keep everybody out? Maybe I shouldn't even, like maybe it doesn't even deserve to be counted as part of New York City. Or should I try to like sneak in around the fence on the edge? And like I did that and kind of walked along the beach of Seagate, but I'd had experience before doing that, and they have security guards and stuff, and so like I didn't think I could walk every street in there just sneaking in. So I was just not sure. I had mixed feelings. Should I try to figure out a way to get in there, or should I just say forget it? So I was walking along the edge of Seagate one day on the public streets of Coney Island, just outside the fence of Seagate, and I'd gone up to the guard booth and said, "Hey, Can guests come in? Are you allowed to come in for the day, like walk around? Can I get a visitor pass or something?" No, you can't do any of that. So I'm like, okay, whatever. So anyway, I'm walking up toward the northern part of Seagate. So I'm at the fence, but there's no gate there. The gate's further south, right? So it's just me, a really tall fence, and then Seagate on the other side. And I hear this little ice cream truck comes driving around on the public side of the fence. And this guy on the other side, inside Seagate, it's like, "Hey, I want an ice cream cone." And I'm like, what the hell? How's he going to...
Ice cream trucks can't come in Seagate?
Yeah.
I guess not.
Yeah. And but he's, there's this big fence in between them. And I'm just like, how's he going to get the ice cream to this guy on the other side of the fence? It was a chain link fence, little holes. Like, you can't pass an ice cream through that. So the guy calls out his order. He's like, he wants a chocolate cone with chocolate sprinkles. It's like the soft serve. The guy gets out of the truck and he makes his cone. And I'm transfixed. I'm like, how is he going to get the ice cream to this guy? It's like a 10-foot tall fence. You can't throw it over the fence.
These guys don't look like athletes.
Yeah, he's not going to climb up the fence to like drop. How's he going to get it there? And he walks up to the fence, and there's one little area where someone's cut a hole in the chain link just big enough to pass ice cream through.
For that transaction.
And both of those guys know where this hole is. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? So this guy, he's standing there, he's eating his ice cream cone inside Seagate. And he's just, contentedly just licking his ice cream cone. And I walk up to him and I'm like, what is this deal with ice cream? He's like, oh, yeah, this ice cream hole. That's how we get ice cream in here. Just nonchalant. And he's also like, doesn't think it's weird that I'm asking this. He's like, yeah, it's ice cream hole. It's pretty cool. And so I start talking to this guy, while he's eating his ice cream. And he's telling me all about growing up in Coney Island. He was a Puerto Rican guy who he said like his was the first Puerto Rican family in that part of Coney Island. He was just telling me he was like, I think he was about 60 years old at the time. And so he was just telling me about his whole life there. It was pretty interesting. And I started asking him about Seagate. And, I tell him, I'm doing this walk, but they wouldn't let me, come in Seagate to walk around. And he was like, yeah, you got to be like visiting someone to come into Seagate. And I was like, oh, cool. Can I come visit you? And he's like, oh, yeah, that'd be fine. So, it was the end of the day, so I couldn't do it that day, but he gave me his phone number. So a couple months later, I arrange a time with him. I come back. Now I know what to say when I get to the gate. I'm going to visit so-and-so at this address. And so they let me in. So I go visit him. We hang out. I walk all the streets in Seagate. And, I spend the day with this guy.
All starting from an ice cream hole.
Ice cream hole, yeah. And just like, I can't tell you how fascinated I was to be like, how are they going to get the ice cream there? Like, clearly there's a plan. The guy's not going to make an ice cream.
But they both knew the plan.
They both knew where the hole was. And Robert was the guy's name. He's like, yeah, the ice cream hole's been there for years. Like, I guess they don't let the ice cream trucks into Seagate. Yeah. So, like, that was the solution. Like, if you want ice cream, you just go up to the ice cream hole. And
your solution to getting into Seagate was to befriend somebody.
Exactly. Befriend someone who's buying their chocolate ice cream cone from the Mr. Softy truck.
I love that story. Was there a scary moment or several at any point? Whether it's weather or...
Sure. I mean, I haven't really felt in danger on my walk. There was, I mean, this was a kind of eye-opening thing that happened to me, where I was... So another thing I'll walk through, like, there's lots of big public housing projects in New York, and kind of like parks and cemeteries, there's not like roads running through them, but there's lots of paths. If you can picture, it's like usually lots of big apartment towers, and then paths in between them. So I'll walk those areas too. So anyway, one day I was up in the South Bronx, and I go to walk into this housing project just to kind of make my little loop through it and pop back out on the other side. And, there's a police officer standing outside on the sidewalk, like right before I go into the housing project. So I just walk by him, I just kind of nod at him and we acknowledge each other. And I walk through the housing project and, I take a couple photos or something. I'm always taking photos of stuff. And I come back out the other end of the housing project, and I can see that as I'm coming out, and I noticed, by the way, a couple of police officers in their car inside the housing project. So I come back out, and I can see that first police officer walking down the street to meet me. He's clearly coming to talk to me or something. And he comes up to me, and he says, excuse me, sir, can I ask you what you have in your back pocket? And, like your water bottle right here. I always have this water bottle in my back pocket. And, being a white guy who doesn't seem threatening to the police, I very naively just reach in and I say, oh, it's just this water bottle I have in my back pocket. And as I'm doing that, of course, my brain's like, you idiot. He thinks you have a gun in your pocket. And now you're pulling it out on him.
He drew his weapon?
He didn't draw his weapon.
You're lucky.
He's freaked out because he goes, ah! Like, he can't believe I just did that. And I'm realizing that he thought it was a gun, right? And
you're like, I grew up in Ashland, Virginia.
Exactly. And, that's when you kind of start to realize how the world is different for different people who might be perceived differently by police officers or others, And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's just this water bottle. And he's like, okay, can I ask you, do you live around here? And I was like, no, I don't live around here. I explain my walk to him. I'm like, I do this walk. I'm kind of walking all these different streets, walking all these different pathways and everything. And he's like, I understand that, but these people, and just kind of points his thumb at the housing, these people, they see you taking pictures in there, man, they're going to beat your ass. And I start to realize, like, I'm not going to change this guy's opinion on anything. So I'm just like, oh, okay, yeah, thanks. But of course I'm thinking, like, these people aren't going to beat my ass, like.
I have years of proof of that.
Yeah, like, I just try to treat people respectfully, and I tend to get the same behavior back. But it did make me realize, at least for that one guy, he clearly was not threatened by me. And when he thought I was pulling a gun out, he was just totally unprepared for that.
Yeah.
And if I had looked differently and, maybe he thought that I was a threat, that could have been the end of my life, or who knows. So it wasn't scary in the moment for me, but looking back, I was like, wow, like that's given me some perspective on what it could be like to be anyone different, whether it's someone of a different race, a woman. I have no doubt that, there have been guys I met on my walk who were like buddy with me, just strangers I met who I joked around with, who would have probably been harassing women or something,
right.
Like, people treat men and women differently. And so it has made me realize that I think I do genuinely believe that the world's less scary than we think it is, but I also know that it's especially less scary for me, whereas people of other races, genders, whatever, sexual orientation, whatever it is, the world can be a lot scarier place for other people than it is for me too.
Yeah, and you and I have taken that for granted.
Yeah,
for most of our
lives. Exactly.
Yeah. Any other memorable experiences?
Oh my gosh, I mean, infinite ones. I don't even know where to start. There's so many. I mean, a lot of it's it's funny little things. One that I always wish. This is one that always haunts me around this time of year, around Christmas time. I was out in Staten Island, and there was one thing that I love seeing in New York is you see people, all these people of different faiths, and you can see their faith in their yard a lot of time because they have shrines of different gods, goddesses, whatever it is they believe in, and you can learn a lot about. What is that thing? What do these flags represent? And I learned that they're these kind of Hindu flags. They're called Jandi flags. And now I see them in different neighborhoods. And it's just, there's something nice about just knowing something about a person who lives in a place, even if you never meet the person. Something a little bit nice about just, I see that thing and I can know something about you, just a little bit of connection with that person. And anyway, but yeah, you see all these different, all kinds of different evidence of what people believe, which is a neat thing just to realize the diversity of human beliefs. And so I was in Staten Island, and I pass by this house, and it has this really cool homemade shrine with the Virgin Mary in it. It was a Christmas time. It was just before Christmas. So it was all lit up for the holidays. It was kind of like the size of a kind of large doghouse sort of size, like a little building like that. Not just the Virgin Mary, but like a whole little building for her. And it was really cool. Yeah, it had the Christmas lights and everything. It was just clearly homemade. And I love things like that where you see someone's faith or their belief lead them to do a project. You can really feel their personality and who they are in this thing that they spent time crafting. So, to me, that's always something that connects with me. So I'm out there taking photos of it. And the guy whose house it is comes out and he starts talking to me. And he was this Mexican guy. And I think it was actually I think it's Our Lady of Guadalupe. Okay. I think that's the particular apparition of the Virgin Mary that was represented there. It's the national figure of Mexico for Catholics. Anyway, so he starts telling me about it. And, this is another lesson you learn, by the way. Sometimes you feel a little bit awkward if you're taking photos of something in someone's yard and they come out. You're like, oh, do they not want me here? 100% of the time, they want you to ask them about that thing, right?
They've been waiting all day.
Of course, because they spent all this time making. They want to tell you about it. They don't think it's weird that you're there. They're even if they might seem a little suspicious for a second because someone's taking photos in their yard. As soon as you say oh, what is it? Did you make this? Then they're on cloud nine. They're oh, let me tell you about it.
Yeah.
So it was just one of those great things. So he's very proudly telling me about it, and he's oh yeah, every whatever it is, Saturday before Christmas, we have a big holiday party here. You should come out to the party. And it's just the timing. I was all the way on the other side of the city that following Saturday, and I just didn't make it work. But it always haunts me around Christmas. I should have gone to this party. It was
you can still go back.
That's true. You're right. I don't remember the exact, was it always a Saturday or whatever, but I'm sure I have written down somewhere, or sometimes I make little voice memos when something happens to me. Yeah. I could probably go back and find that, and as long as he still lives in that house. Or I could just go camp out there the whole holiday season, wait till the party happens. And, hey, remember me from 9 years ago?
I'm the one guy.
I'm the one guy that asked you about the thing, and you invited me to your party.
That's beautiful. All right, I've been dying to ask you this question. Have you walked every street of Ashland, Virginia?
I have.
Have you really?
I have, definitely.
When was that? That became a thing?
So, when the pandemic started, so I guess I haven't really explained this yet. So a big part of how I make the New York City walk work with fairly minimal sources of income is to not pay rent. That's a super crucial part.
I should have asked you about that.
Yeah. Well, this way we get into it naturally. Yeah. So I couch surf with friends. I cat sit for people, when people are out of town. Sometimes it's a few days. Sometimes I've had up to 2 months of just staying at someone's apartment.
And you're known throughout the city as the guy.
Not really throughout the city, but I have a big enough.
Your network's bigger.
Friends of friends of friends now that it's just big enough to make it work. There are now websites where you can, sign up as a cat sitter, and people can, you can connect through the internet even if you don't know the people. But I've just had a big enough friends of friends network to make it work just enough throughout the years. But so when the pandemic started, you're not going to go bounce from couch to couch with this communicable disease going around.
Right.
And also, nobody was traveling then. We're locked down, so like no one needs me to come watch their cat while they're out of town. So all of a sudden, my like way for finding places to stay in New York City kind of dried up. So I came down to Virginia, and I stayed with my parents, and it ended up being 16 months that I stayed down here in Ashland, which was completely unexpected, but was just wonderful, wonderful time. I mean, both just getting to live with my parents as an adult and like get to know them at this totally different point in both of our lives. I mean, most people don't have that experience, especially in America where the tradition is, you go out on your own when you have your family, and maybe you live in the same town and you get to see your parents here and there, but a lot of people, you see your parents a couple times a year, and that's about it. So that was a wonderful thing. But the other wonderful part about it was being back in my hometown that I only really knew from a kid's point of view, and to get to like rediscover it as an adult and realize I didn't really know where anything was in Hanover, like all these places my mom had taken me or my dad had driven me there, when I was a kid. And now I like figure out where they are related to each other. I start walking between them all. I ride my bike around everywhere. And walked all the streets in Ashland. And I started also keeping track of all the roads like in Hanover County that I was biking. So it's like the thing from New York it wasn't really about New York all along, it turned out. It was just about a way of like discovering wherever you are. So I just kind of imported it right down here to Hanover. So
you have...
So like, but prior to today, I biked by your house already. I biked every street back in this subdivision. Like, I've covered it all,
I did not see that coming.
Yeah.
So you've walked basically all of New York and Ashland, Virginia, and a lot of Hanover. Is there a third part of the world that you've done?
Those are the only two, because I didn't really have this idea of like keeping track of everywhere I was walking until I started it in New York.
Gotcha.
But then once I came down to Ashland, I was like, oh, I could just do the same thing. And there's something, no matter how long you've lived in a place, there are going to be streets you haven't been on, just because there's just nothing's taking you there.
Right.
It's 1 block away from like the main route that you normally travel. Like you never go up there. You don't know anyone who lives on that street. There's no store there you go to. There's no park there you go to. So like there's something, and I'd encourage anyone listening to this, do this or just some version of it, even if it's just in your neighborhood. Like just the kind of mechanism of walking every block of X place, whatever it is, it just makes you interact with the place in a way different way. It makes you excited about going to the street you haven't been on. It takes you to the places you otherwise just have no reason to go. And it opens up your home to you in a new way. It gives you a new perspective on it that you don't have, like, no matter how long you've lived there.
And you're going to meet people that you would have never met otherwise.
Yeah, meet people and just see things about your own hometown that you never knew about. So yeah, that was a really incredible experience, and also just another great lesson for me that, like, the reason that walking in New York's fascinating is not just because it's New York and it's such a fascinating place. It's just because you're walking.
Yeah.
Like walking everywhere makes places fascinating, no matter if it's just your puny little center of the universe.
So you're eventually going to get to 100%, or something happens in your life. You're like, what, I'm moving on from this phase of my life. Is there another city that is down the road for you, or are you always going to be a New Yorker?
I don't know. There's no particular plan. I mean, my brother lives in Chicago, and every time I'm out there, I just go out and walk every day. And man, I mean, I love walking around there. I was house sitting for a friend in Philadelphia over the summer, and like that was so much fun walking there. So anytime I'm in a city and I start walking it, I kind of think in the moment I'm like, oh, I should walk every street here, but I don't have like a particular plan or anything.
Are you mapping those walks?
No, those are just like just going out for the day and having fun. But I could, it would be super fun to do the like every street thing in those places, but I don't have a particular plan for it. Which doesn't mean it wouldn't happen, but
you are a planner, like day to day, because you plan your routes to.
Yeah, it's kind of a mix of like, I have the very like anal retentive engineering, like dot every I, cross every T kind of thing. So yeah, all my walks are very planned out and the map's very precise, but also like, I don't know what I'm going to be doing a week from today. So it's kind of a mix of spontaneity and planning. And
you're really living in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I try to, I guess.
We're
all struggling to do that. Yeah.
As you're walking, you're living in the moment.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice. It's a way of being that encourages that. Like, it's hard to go for a long walk and not be in the moment, right? That's just what walking does. It fixes you where you are, and you're surrounded by the environment. You feel the air around you. You hear and smell everything around you. So it just kind of puts you in a place. It's hard to not be in the moment when you're outdoors walking.
And you're not anxious, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean that I guess that's another big lesson from my walk is like, you can kind of, at least I guess maybe I should say from my previous perspective of like having been such a planner, I was always so worried about the future and having to figure everything out ahead of time. And, I mean, if you have very specific plans to get married and have kids and all of that undoubtedly, takes more planning to make that happen. But I think life in general, you can kind of get by spontaneously a little more. Like that's taken away anxiety from my life, realizing that I don't have to have everything planned out in order to make life work. And like, when I started my New York walk, I thought, this will take a couple years. I could patch together couches to sleep on for a couple years. And if I had known, it's been like almost 11 years now and counting. If I had known it would take that long, I probably wouldn't have started. I would have said, I can't do this for 11 years. Just like cobbling together a few speaking gigs or teaching things or odd jobs. There's no way I'll be able to make it work financially, even without not having to pay rent. But it turns out it's just worked. Like I've been able to just go day by day, and it's just worked out way longer than I thought it would. And so that's kind of just given me faith in life in general that you don't always have to have everything planned out, especially if you're open to different paths in your future. Not necessarily having to go one direction in life.
Any regrets from the last 11 years?
No, not really. Yeah. I mean, I just feel really fortunate.
That's awesome, right? How many people say their last 11 years no regrets?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I do feel like the luckiest person in the world, and I understand that I'm so dependent on other people. Like people just help me all throughout this, whether it's giving me couches to sleep on, or people on my cross country walk letting me stay there, giving me food. Like, I'm so dependent on everybody else, and I just feel so incredibly lucky that there's so much generosity in the world to make a life like mine possible.
You've helped people too, though. You've enriched their lives by them getting to know you.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. I mean, that's certainly nice to think that. But it's just to say that, like, not that I feel bad about people helping me. If I feel good, I feel good that there's that much generosity in the world that that's helped me go through this, and that it's nice to. I think one thing I think about America is we have an idea that like we're so independent minded that like you can't like, it makes you weak to rely on anybody else. And I think that
that's silly.
Yeah. I think that when we owe debts to other people, that's kind of what makes community, like this person helped you out, and so you want to help them out, and like it's those giving and taking kind of cycles that build bonds in a community and make it a strong community, not just a bunch of individuals. And I've just experienced that so much in my life, and I'm really indebted to it. And yeah, so that's why I just feel like such a fortunate person. And like even my time as an engineer, I don't think was wasted. I mean, just financially, I had to be able to save up money in order to be doing this, and just all the experiences from that have been so valuable in life too. So yeah, I feel like I've just been lucky every step of the way.
And you were fairly frugal because you have to be, right?
Yeah, I'm just by nature a frugal person. I just I way prefer saving money to buying anything with it. So that's just always been my nature.
You've met your bizarro Matt Green today. I have a feeling I'm not the only one.
No, definitely not.
All right, I can't wait to hear the answer to this question, and it's you're not expecting this, I don't think. Imagine you're a talk show host. You have one talk show. It lasts an hour and a half. You can invite 3 or 4 folks on your talk show.
Okay.
They can be alive or dead. They can be friends of yours, family. They can be famous, not famous. They can be complete strangers from 1,000 years ago. Your show can be thought-provoking. It can be fun. It can be pure entertainment. It can be a mix of those things. It can be educational, even. Male guest, female guest, musical act, because I assume you listen to music, and if you're into stand-up comedy or just comedy in general, somebody from that comedy genre that you would love to talk to.
Okay.
So you're interviewing all four of these.
Okay.
Things.
Female guest, I'll definitely have to say Peace Pilgrim. You know,
I've just seen that one coming.
She's just been kind of the light, you know, the kind of inspirational light that I keep in front of me, and just thinking about life and what I'm doing. And yeah, I mean, I've just thought about it. She shaped so much of just what I've thought about and done over the years. And I'd love to have the opportunity to talk to her.
It'd be amazing, right?
Yeah.
You talk to her for days.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Male guest, I think I'd have to go with, you know, I would love to talk to like my grandfather. My mom's father died before I was born. I never got the chance to meet him. My dad's father I knew kind of up until college, and that's when he died. But maybe him, since I knew him as a kid, you know, I would love to be able to talk to him as an adult. And I would love to know what he thinks about what, like, you know, he immigrated here to America, and he worked so hard to build up.
We have no concept how far that generation.
I mean, both he and my grandmother, but you know, I already fulfilled the female part of the
right.
But you know, I mean, they work so hard to build this life for their kids, and in some ways to like make it so their grandkids could do things like, you know, have the luxury to just say, you know what, I'm going to step out of the engineering world and the, you know, normal work world and like do this strange sounding thing. I'd love to know what he thinks about it, and like just understand where he came from, and you know, I mean, he would tell me stories about his life as a kid when I was a kid, but to be able to understand them now as an adult and put those things in perspective, I would really love to know what he thought about this.
I'm guessing he would be perplexed, but
Probably.
Because he loves his grandson, he would get to a place where it's all good.
I think that's probably true. I think it'd be some of each. He was a very, very like loving and just kind-hearted and gentle and generous person. So, yeah. But yeah, I think there would definitely be like, you're doing what exactly? Okay, musical guest. Well, I'm going to have to go with, this was like the first, I was just talking to my mom about this. It was the first band like whose album I ever bought. It was the first music of my own I ever had. They Might Be Giants.
Okay, yeah, nice.
You know, they've existed throughout the years. They started in Brooklyn. You know, back in like 1986, I think was their first album. They're still making music to this day. And they have this kind of, if you've heard of them, you probably think of them as like almost maybe like weird novelty music or something. There's a little bit of like wackiness to them.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more to them than that, like once you really get into it. And yeah, they've been kind of the band of my life. They're just kind of this unusual group of guys doing their own things. I mean, it started with just these two guys in Brooklyn. One of them played the accordion and one played the guitar. And they'd go to like the East Village and like go to these art, you know, it was like art music shows, like performance art. That's
the more
where they
different
play.
you were, the better. Yeah.
And so that was like the origin of them. And they also had this amazing thing. One of them, the accordion player, broke his arm. He was like working as a bike messenger back in the way early days, and he broke his arm, and they couldn't, I think they couldn't perform live shows until it healed. And so they came up with this idea where they'd record a new song every day and put it on their answering machine. And they called it Dial a Song. And they'd put an advertisement for it in the Village Voice newspaper. And I can still tell you the number. It's 387-6962. And you dial that number, and you just hear their answering machine, and you would hear the new song that they'd record on the answering machine. And you'd be the only person in the world listening to it, because it was a tape, you know, it was before voicemail. It was a tape answering machine.
Right.
So you could, like, call that number and be the only person in the world listening to their song at that moment.
That's pretty cool.
So they were just a really cool couple of guys. And, yeah, so that would definitely be my musical guest. And comedian, you know, I didn't mention this, but one of the things that that I used to do in my like trying to not be an engineer phase, when I lived in Northern Virginia for a year, I started doing open mic stand-up comedy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did.
That takes a lot of guts.
It did. It took a lot of guts, a lot of failure, like a lot of humiliation on stage, which I think is painful but very good for personal growth.
Absolutely, but it's the first step. You have to take the first step.
But I met a bunch of people doing that, some of whom have gone on to be, you know, professional comedians. So one of them, I'll give him a shout out, Rory Scovel.
Okay.
You'll find, you know, he's been in some movies. He's been on some talk shows. He's had some really good segments on Conan O'Brien.
Okay.
but he's really getting there, and he's a really original. He does a lot of like improv in his comedy. Really original guy, and I guess I can kind of relate to him in that, like, in a way, walking around is a little bit improvisational. You never know who you're going to meet. You don't know what you're going to say to them. You don't know what you're going to find. You don't know what's going to interest you. And he kind of has that attitude in his comedy. Like he recorded an entire comedy special that was just 100% him talking to the audience. Like he'd come out on stage with no net.
Just start talking.
And just see what would happen. So I kind of relate to that.
He probably loved that.
Yeah.
Especially after the crowd was warmed up.
He's great. So, so that would be, I'll give him a shout out. And that would be my comedian I'd have on the show.
I check out your talk show.
Yeah. It's pretty good, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, how many days a year do you walk? Like, and when I say walk, you have intent to do a day trip sort of thing.
It's varied a lot over the years. So, like beginning the New York walk, I thought I was going to do it just like my cross-country walk. So that's to say, I spend the bulk of the day walking, and then I spend a little time uploading a few photos that I took. And that's what I thought. My blog would just be a photo record of, a few photos here and there. And, maybe I have a story to tell that I type up, or maybe it's just, here's this photo, whatever this thing is. And then I started to realize, like, all these things I was taking photos of that I was curious about, I can find out a lot of information about these things. Because it's New York, so much has just been written about so many places. It was shocking to me, though. Like, in all the newspaper archives there are, like, you can find stuff about, you have a picture of a building. Like, you can find a lot of stuff about a lot of buildings in New York. Like, way more than you would think, not just the big famous buildings, Yeah. Same thing with, like, some event that happened, or a particular location, or a particular person, or an animal that I see in the city, a plant that I see. What's this flower? Like, I started to realize everything that was catching my eye, not everything, maybe half of the things I'm taking photos of, like, I can learn about those things. And that takes a lot of time too. So it went from walking every day in the early days of the walk to like walking every other day. And the other days I'd spend just researching. And then it just got more and more to like, I'm just spending more and more time learning about the things that I'm seeing and less time actually walking. So that was kind of the general trend over the years. Then I come down to Virginia in the pandemic. And, the pandemic, I think, makes us all think about health a little bit more and trying to live healthy lives. And I started thinking, I really got to get back to where I'm walking every day and not just doing stuff at the computer. So then it was like every day during the pandemic, I'm out like, trying to walk like at least 12 miles or something around Ashland or be out on my bike or something. So that kind of kick-started me back into the like, make sure I'm out there every day kind of thing. So now that's back where I am in New York, even though a lot of my walks now are not blocks that I need to walk, because wherever I'm staying, I've almost certainly walked everything around that neighborhood now in New York because there's so little left.
Yeah.
So a lot of days I'm just out rewalking places just for the hell of it. And that's taught me another important lesson, which is like the 20th time I walk a block, I finally see this incredible thing where I'm like, how did I not see that all the other times? It reminds me how little we take in any given instance.
Probably 20%.
Yeah, if that, And like the idea we have, I've already been to that place. I don't want to go there again. I want to go somewhere new. But like the place you've already been, like you've seen the tiniest little sliver of it. And that's a really good lesson to learn, I think.
There's no way to get to the depth.
Exactly. Yeah. You're never going to see all of any place. Like even a simple seeming place is much more infinite than your mind can handle. So now I'm back into like every day I make sure I'm outside for, at least like 4 hours or something like that.
Out of all the photos you've taken, how many are not logged somewhere?
Oh my God. So my blog now, it's like 7 years behind, and it's about halfway through the photos.
And you're trying to maintain chronological order?
Yes, it's going chronologically. So I have probably, I don't know off the top of my head, somewhere in the neighborhood of over 10,000 photos on my blog. And that's only half of the photos.
Oh my God.
So I've got like another 10,000 to come.
Can people help you?
It's one of those things where like initially it feels like, oh, the point of this blog is to just be caught up and to finish it. But I think kind of like the walking, the point is not really to finish it. The point's to do it. And so I think I'd rather have the blog take forever and just do it at whatever pace, like come back to it, leave it for a little bit, come back to it, start updating it again. Like to do that as my attention and my curiosity drives me to do it. I think that's kind of the important part about it, not just to finish it for the sake of finishing it. So, it's taken like every day of photos that I post to the blog takes longer and longer to do because I spend more and more time like going down rabbit holes. So I might not finish it before I die, but that's okay. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not like I don't feel initially when I started getting behind on it, I felt bad. It was like, no, I got to be caught up. Like no matter what, I got to get caught up. And now I'm like, it's just about the experience of learning about stuff and telling other people about it. It's not about just finishing it for the sake of being
checking
done.
a giant box.
Yeah. So,
all right, let's close talking about your family.
Sounds good.
I'm dying to know what your parents think about your last 11 years.
I can tell you my perception of that. I could have brought them along today. They could give you the real answer. But I think that, initially, of course, they were very worried. It was really almost 13 years ago when I quit my job. No, almost 14 years ago. Yeah. So that was probably the most worrying thing for them, like the quitting the job and doing the walk across America. Kind of giving up what seemed like a really stable career and doing a thing that there's a lot of unknown in the idea of walking across America. What could happen to you? It's less scary for me because I'm out there experiencing it, but for them, they have to imagine every day like what could possibly be going wrong.
Fear of the unknown.
A natural thing to worry about. And then I think over the years, they've, they definitely want me to have a more stable life just for my own sake, just out of the love of parents. You want your children to be set up very secure, like not have doubt in their life. So there's definitely that part that they feel, but I think more than any other parents I know, they also see the value in what I'm doing and accept it, as weird of a thing as it is. They're encouraging too. Even though they wish I were doing something that was more stable, they just make me feel good about what I'm doing, that it is a valuable thing, even if there's no real way to articulate why that is. I think part of them probably, likes the different kind of stories and experiences I have to share, and they, certainly see the value in that. So I think probably the ideal for them would be to somehow be doing this as a job and just getting paid for it, and then like that could satisfy all the boxes. But yeah, so I think there's certainly some worry, but it's been so many years now that they're probably used to it. And again, I like I was saying before, I feel so grateful about everything in my life, and a huge part of that is my parents. That your parents just have to instill in you the belief that you can do something different with your life. Like that takes a foundation to be able to kind of step outside of like the main way we organize our lives around careers and things like that. Like you have to have a belief that you can do something different and it will be okay. And I think a lot of that comes from the foundation that your parents build, that that gives you that kind of self-esteem and belief in yourself. And man, my parents were so amazing at that, and I'm so grateful for that they made me just feel like I had more freedom in life than I think a lot of people feel that they have.
It's a great lesson for any parent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I imagine your parents get a lot of joy out of you being happy, and I think you've been very happy for the last 11 years, and that makes them joyful.
Definitely, yeah. It is like a kind of fulfillment in life that I never understood before. And it took a little bit to get to it. Like at the start of my walk, I didn't know what I was doing, and there were moments of like, what have I done? What is going on? Is what I'm doing worth anything? That was something I questioned a lot. Like, is this just pointless? What I'm doing? Like, what? Is this selfish? All those kind of questions. But over the years, I've come to believe in it, and yeah, it does bring a real feeling of fulfillment that I never had as an engineer or anything else.
Yeah, it sounds like you're at peace.
Yeah. And again, I have to thank my family for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's holiday season, and your brother's coming into town today.
He's coming into town today.
And we're at an hour and 44 minutes.
All right, perfect. Yeah, he's probably at the house now.
I appreciate you doing this.
My pleasure.
Matt, I really do.
You're a really great host too.
I appreciate it.
I like you. You kind of go with the flow and ask really great questions too. And I felt like we could just meander anywhere.
I enjoy meandering quite a bit.
Yeah, so it's fun. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.